Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel BethChatsBooks. Now today's video is going to be a currently reading video. So in a previous video I mentioned how I had just been a bit overwhelmed this month with getting into a routine and I hadn't been reading extensively, at least for the first half of the month, and so I thought it would just be a lot more simplistic and easier for me to articulate what I'm reading by doing a currently reading video instead of a TBR and wrap up for the month. So without further ado, I'm just going to go and get stuck in. So in a previous video I mentioned how I was currently reading this book, but I also managed to finish it this month. That was A Spool of Blue Thread by Anne Tyler. Now I took this out from the library and I ended up really enjoying it. This book took me a lot longer to read than I expected, considering it is quite big font and it's very easy to read, and it's not really, considering it's a hardback, that big of a book to read. But I had to dip in and out. I just recently started work when I tried to read this book, and the first couple of weeks I was very tired just getting through a working week and readjusting to that. But the overall story I really enjoyed, so I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It follows a family, Red and Abby, who are the second generation to live in the house. They married, and it's kind of centred around this house in America that they live. And it kind of goes backwards a little bit to Red's parents when they first moved in, because Red's father originally built the house for another family. Okay, so technically they're the third, but they're the second generation of a family, but they're the third occupants in the house, I guess you can say. Because Red's father originally created the house for a rich family, he built it, and then he eventually moved in with his family, had Red and her sister Merrick, I want to say, and then Red married Abby and they moved in and had many kids here, and then the kids were looking at moving in. So basically it's just a family saga. I'm making this way more complicated than it needs to be, but it kind of goes forward in time and also backwards in time through the generations, and we kind of get a little bit more of a sense of who these characters are. Ultimately, the section that dealt with Red's parents was the least interesting for me. I found that a little bit tedious, and I really didn't like Red's father and the way he treated Red's mother, and kind of how she saw their relationship in a completely different way than he did, and I thought that was a bit sour and a bit bitter to read. I didn't enjoy that bit. But Red and Abby's romance, how they ended up as a couple, and then their story of having the family and the eccentricities of that family was really nice for me. It's a kind of cosy, enjoyable read about a family that's very relatable to your own, I'm sure. It's a big family, and although it has kind of a traditional structure as such, the family are quite close, everybody's individual, and it's not a sickly sweet family story. I think there's a lot of characters that you can resonate with, that you yourself kind of have similar traits to almost all of the children, and also anybody who has children can probably sympathise with Red and Abby's standpoints in a few of the kind of family arguments in this story. So it was very enjoyable, and like I said, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. When I was reading it I really enjoyed it, but upon finishing it, it was just a nice, in the moment, cosy read, but it didn't really shake up my world. So there's that one. And then the second book I managed to finish this month was The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. I'm going to insert a picture because I listened to this on audiobook, and I ended up giving this between 4 and 4.5 out of 5 stars. Amelia Fox, and I've forgotten the name of the man, but some of the stories were read aloud by Amelia Fox, predominantly most of the collection, and then a few of the stories were read by the male actor's voice, who I will link down below when I figure out who he was. But basically the stories were beautiful. They were very animalistic, very descriptive, dealt with women predominantly, and what I really liked is I recently watched an Angela Carter documentary and it dealt with the Bloody Chamber. It kind of mentioned how the Bloody Chamber was a revamp of fairy tales where women have the predominant power. And I thought that was a really interesting dynamic, because in each of the stories women really change the tale. They really take back some power. Animalistic desire is reflected in a lot of the stories, dealt with kind of women as hunters, women as wolves, a lot of lust and desire and bloodthirst. It was very, very descriptive, and it was kind of very immersive. But one thing I did struggle with is that on audiobook I kind of lost the thread. Obviously a lot of the stories kind of interweave, and a lot of them revamp a classic fairy tale, and I couldn't really fully get immersed because I had pockets of time to listen to it, and that's why it took me so long, because audiobooks, surprisingly, now that I drive, I really don't listen to as much as I would. Usually when I commute on the buses, that's when I was getting all my listening time in, but now with my second-hand little car, he doesn't have an aux cable, so I can't just stick it in and listen to an audiobook. And I've noticed when I get home at night, I just want to put some cheesy TV on, like The Great British Bake Off, or I want to get my reading hours in then, so I haven't actually been getting through audiobooks very much, so I've took a little bit of an audiobook break. But back to the point, I really think it doesn't do it justice in an audiobook form, because it was quite an extensive time. I think it was 7 or 8 hours, which isn't that long for an audiobook, but when you don't really have those pockets of time, it did take me a full month just to get through. So I think I will try and attempt to read it in physical copy and see if that allows me to really get inside the style a little bit better. But it has definitely encouraged me to pick up some more Angela Carter, because I love her very descriptive, dark stories. The language that she uses is so beautiful. I've never really read or listened to something that sounds quite as beautifully translated as Angela Carter's words. I mean, most books I read don't really have such flowery language as Angela does, but I really appreciate that every once in a while. So she's got a very, very unique style, and it's definitely encouraged me to try some more of her in the future. So I've gave it 4 out of 5 / 4.5 out of 5 stars, because it's beautiful, it's very visceral, it satisfies that dark craving. I love it's centered about women and femininity, sexuality, desire, and hoping to pursue her again in the future, so there's that. And then another book I read, which was really a book I read in one sitting. It was in the back of my sister's car, and she is a major fan of self-help books. Much to mine and my brother's disgust, because I'm not a massive fan of self-help, because I think they do kind of perpetuate this need to constantly have another self-help book, and they don't really teach good practices of a little bit of taking things with a pinch of salt. You know, they tell you that the marketing around self-help as well is always that it's going to give you every single answer to every problem in your life, and ultimately using them as a crux for your life and a help is really not very productive. But anywho, so I found one in the back of her car, and she said that this is a very quick self-help book that she thinks is really useful for different professions, and she said I should, if I'm such a skeptic, I should read it and see what I think. So the book in question was called Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson, which I'll insert a picture because the book is somewhere in the other room where I just discarded it, and I don't have any real desire to go and find it while I'm in the middle of filming. So in the end, I gave it a 2 out of 5 stars. So it follows this very simplistic story within a story. So there's a group of friends who were friends at college, and they meet up and they decide to talk about how their lives are going, and then one of them introduces a story that he was told, and he implemented the story within his company, shared it with everybody, and it helped them restructure the company's ethos and basically made everybody way more productive. So they all said, well, share this story with us then if it's had such a profound effect on you. And so it follows the story of 4 individuals. 2 are mice and 2 are little people. And I think one is Sniffy, one is something like Speedy, one is a Har, and one is Haw, I believe, but H-A-W. And the 2 little people are Har and Haw, I believe. Basically, one of them, the mouse, one just constantly is on the hunt to sniff out cheese, and the other one wants to kind of speedily run after the cheese. The third one always hums and haws about what to do, and the fourth one just doesn't really do anything, kind of has a bit of self-pity. Basically, I've really forgotten the gist because it really wasn't that good. Basically, the concept is that these 4 individuals, 2 mice and 2 little people, are thrown into a maze, and there is cheese that's deposited in certain areas of the maze. So at first they all find the cheese in a certain area, and then slowly over time that cheese gets diminished and is retracted. There's no more cheese. And then the 4 of them have to decide what to do next. So the 2 mice run off in search of more, and we kind of go through the journey of the little people, and one of the little people decides in the end to leave this area and go and find more cheese, and he writes on the walls motivational stuff for the other individual person to find at some point to motivate him to also follow in his footsteps and go and search for more cheese. So in the end, the first individual person finds the cheese and the other individual person never leaves where the last cheese was, hoping and praying that somehow the cheese will come back to him. So really, I am sceptical about self-help anyway. This story to me had a lot of faults and flaws, and miraculously after this story was told, all the college individual people discussed it and reminisced and admitted that their lives hadn't been going in the directions they wanted, identified which of the 4 they were, and suddenly life was hunky-dory for everyone. It was just way too simplistic, not really well thought out. There's a lot of loopholes, and it's not a very clear, divisive message either. The presumption that all individuals would go into these 4 categories really is not very reflective of the complexities of human nature, and the assumption that all humans have a lack of ability to adapt to certain situations or to acknowledge the need to adapt really doesn't do much justice to the human race. I just found the whole story really rather frustrating, and thankfully for me it was only a short story, and I simply said to my sister afterwards, this is not for me, I don't buy this and I'm not interested, sorry. So technically I read it, so I thought I would count it into my currently reading, but no, it was not for me. And then the last book, which I'm currently still reading, I am on page 367 and there's about 700 and something pages, so I'm about halfway. I'm just going to round it up to about halfway. And that is Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix by J.K. Rowling. Now what I love, I've took the sleeve off, the dust jacket sleeve, because I just find it more comfortable if I'm going to read a hardback to take that off. But as you can see, I don't know how well you can see, but this book is really, like, the spine is really damaged. Look, that it protrudes out here. So we've had these are our original copies, like I mentioned to you a while back, because I was reading it. Look, it's kind of like the spine's moving all over the shop. And I am really tempted to update our copies because we've had these since we were little, but it's kind of nice reading a battered old copy that I know that we've all loved and appreciated. And these are the originals, but obviously with a hardback like this, the spine is really taking some wear and tear at the moment. And I laughed the other day because Charles Heathcote uploaded a picture onto Twitter of his Goblet of Fire and the spine has completely been destroyed, and he tweeted saying any miracles to help this survive, and people were recommending superglue and things, and it made me chuckle because all of us that loved Harry Potter from the very beginning are probably having a little bit of wear and tear issues with our original books, but there's something kind of endearing and charming about that, so I don't know whether I might treat myself at some point. But anyway, back to the actual story. So I'm really enjoying reading this at the moment. This is one of the books that from this one onwards I forget a lot of information, because when it comes to the books a lot is given that the films don't necessarily portray. So I really always remember vividly up to Goblet of Fire, and I think the films translate quite faithfully to the books up to the Goblet of Fire, and then afterwards kind of have to chop and dice. Although I suppose there's a few characters that just don't get any airtime. For example, Winky, which is Dobby's house elf friend. We don't really get a lot of airtime for her, and in Goblet of Fire she's kind of not mentioned, and she has a little bit of a role in here as well. And some other characters, for example, I only just realised rereading this recently that there was a very explosive kind of storyline for poor little Ron in this story about Ginny dating Dean Thomas, but apparently it isn't Dean Thomas. It's Michael Corner, who, I don't know who that is, but in the book, it's definitely not Dean Thomas. So that was a small revelation for me upon rereading this. But I'm just really happy being immersed in the world of Harry Potter. It's fun and it's nostalgic, and there's some really exciting things going on in this one. I forgot all about kind of Dumbledore's army and preparing and all of the horrible Umbridge bits that you kind of grown at, but also you kind of get really immersed in all the Ministry's meddling. So I'm having a thoroughly enjoyable time rereading this and getting to the kind of more meat of the story. And obviously in this book, Sirius gets his last kind of airtime, and him and Lupin. I love the bit at the beginning of this where they go to Sirius's house and Harry learns all about Sirius's family tree and how a lot of the pureblood families are interconnected, and a dark dreary house, and they meet Creature, another house elf, and he sees all of his favourite people and Lupin, and we get introduced to Tonks, and it's really nice to that homely part of the beginning of this story. So I'm really enjoying it, and I'll let you guys know, but I'm pretty much probably going to give it a 4 or above, because I thought that this wouldn't compete with some of my favourites like Prisoner of Azkaban and Goblet of Fire, but it is thoroughly enjoyable right now, and I am very much enjoying it. So we will see if that changes, but for now it's definitely a 4-star read for me right now. So that's everything that I read in my recently reading catch-up of the last month or so. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please hit the subscribe button if you want to be alerted for when any of my future videos come out, and I'll see you very soon. Bye now.